A hiring panel hears a smooth interview and feels certain they have found the right candidate. Confidence spreads quickly because a coherent story feels safer than admitting uncertainty. The mind is built to predict and relies on shortcuts when information is incomplete. A shortcut called a heuristic is a fast rule of thumb that replaces careful probability. These shortcuts save time but also create repeatable errors in judgment and prediction. When errors repeat, organizations misread talent, misjudge risk, and reward the wrong patterns. In a war room or a boardroom, the urge for certainty can silence questions that would prevent mistakes. Decisions then get defended with more detail, even when the detail does not improve accuracy. In the next minutes, you will learn about anchors, framing, and statistical checks that undo common thinking traps. This video is inspired by the Undoing project by Michael Lewis, and subscribe to keep learning practical ways to judge uncertainty. A common mistake is treating a vivid description as increasing the probability, even when logic suggests otherwise. The mechanism is representativeness, where we judge likelihood by similarity to a stereotype rather than actual odds. This makes predictions sound persuasive due to extra detail, but it can reduce accuracy. It also fosters overconfident explanations, as coherent narratives overshadow base rates and chance. Consider the Linda problem, where a woman described as politically engaged is given a less likely combined identity. Most people choose the detailed option, even though a conjunction cannot be more probable than its parts. This pattern illustrates how the mind substitutes an easier question, does it fit, for how likely is it? Once this substitution occurs, reasoning becomes stubborn, and correcting it feels like an attack on intuition. When a story sounds convincing, strip it to its simplest claim and ask what must be true first. Then compare that claim to the base rate, because probability starts with the pool you are drawing from. An anchor is an initial number that pulls later estimates toward it, even when it is irrelevant. The availability heuristic is a mental shortcut where we judge frequency or likelihood based on how easily examples come to mind. Anchors can make forecasts and negotiations hinge on the first figure mentioned, rather than on independent evidence. Availability can make rare events feel common after vivid news, while familiar routines get underestimated or ignored. In one experiment, participants spun a wheel, saw a random number, and then guessed how many African countries exist. Higher wheel numbers produced higher guesses, showing how a meaningless starting point can bend judgment. These effects reveal that intuition is sensitive to cues in the environment, not just to facts. Small changes in context can shift estimates, which explains why confident people disagree on the same question. To resist anchors, generate your own estimate before hearing any numbers, then check it against independent data. To resist availability, ask for counts over time and compare them to a known baseline, not a memorable anecdote. People evaluate outcomes relative to a reference point, so the same result can feel like a gain or a loss. Loss aversion means that losing feels worse than an equal-sized gain feels good. When a decision is framed as avoiding a loss, individuals often accept greater risks than they would for a gain. This shifts preferences in politics, business, and personal life because the language used changes the mental starting point. When given a sure gain versus a gamble, most opt for safety, but the same numbers framed as losses can push one towards gambling. A medical framing test showed that saving lives or losing lives produced opposite choices, even with identical totals. This is not a moral flaw, but a built-in sensitivity to perceived setbacks. If the frame sets the reference point, decision-makers should inspect the frame before debating options. Restate any proposal in at least two equivalent frames, one in gains and one in losses, before making a decision. If reframing changes your preference, subscribe to keep learning how to spot bias and judge risk under uncertainty. Accurate prediction begins with base rates, which are the prior frequencies in the group you are sampling. Regression to the mean suggests that extreme performance often returns to more typical levels, even without a specific cause. Without base rates, people tend to focus on irrelevant details and overlook how common each outcome truly is. Without considering regression, people may misinterpret improvement or decline as evidence that praise or punishment caused the change. In flight training, instructors praised excellent maneuvers, but blamed the instructor when the next attempt looked worse. The simpler explanation is that extremes tend to move back toward the average, so feedback often gets the credit or blame. The same mistake occurs in performance reviews, where one exceptional month can lead to stories that later collapse. This keeps experts confident because they remember the story and miss the underlying statistical pattern. Before making predictions, write down the base rate and ask what new evidence truly shifts it, rather than focusing on the narrative. When evaluating results, track outcomes across multiple attempts and look for trends, not just one dramatic change. Interviews can introduce the halo effect, where a single positive trait influences the entire judgment of a person. Implementing a simple scoring system ensures separate ratings, which reduces the temptation to invent a single, flattering story. Experts often become more confident as they add details, even when the extra detail makes prediction worse. Simple formulas can outperform professionals because they apply the same weights consistently, rather than shifting with mood. Scouts overlooked a player who suddenly excelled in scoring, but still discounted him because he did not fit the prototype. A team executive felt his evaluation rise after acquiring a player, demonstrating the endowment effect in real time. These examples illustrate why judgment needs structure, as raw intuition can absorb stereotypes and context effects silently. The goal is not to distrust people, but to separate observation from interpretation, and then test predictions. Use interviews for values and fit, but make predictions with base rates, track records, and simple scoring rules. Record your forecast and compare them to outcomes, as feedback over time is the only cure for confident guessing. Better judgment starts by acknowledging that confidence is not evidence, and that mistakes follow patterns. Once this is accepted, the task becomes designing checks that interrupt predictable shortcuts. You saw how representativeness and availability replace probability, and how anchors pull estimates away from independent thinking. You also saw how framing shifts risk-taking, and how base rates and regression restore clearer prediction. Structured scoring and simple models reduce noise because they treat cases consistently instead of reacting to stories. Over time, this creates calmer decisions, fewer surprises, and more trust because reasoning can be explained and reviewed. Start with one decision domain, write down the key outcomes, and keep a record of forecasts and results. Then invite a skeptical partner to challenge the frame and the base rate, not your identity. The payoff is a mind that stays curious under uncertainty and a process that learns instead of defending. Subscribe for more stories and tools that help you judge evidence, spot bias, and decide with clarity.